Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Today I've got a special guest. I've got Brandon Surecki, kind of the founder of Boss Shotshells. Now, in the earlier show that we did with Boss, we had Lee Chose on. Lee is the brand manager of Boss, and he really talked about the brand and how, the whole company came to light. But what I wanted Brandon to come on here and talk to us about is really the technical aspects of Boss, really the ballistics of those shells. But before we do that, Brandon, kind of give our audience an idea of who you are, where you're from, and how you kind of came about of, creating this new Boss ammo.
I'm from Southwest Michigan. I guess I'll be 39 next month, so I'm not young, but I'm not old. And I'm a lifelong tinkerer. And I've owned a handful of businesses and worked for my family business ever since I was a little kid, which I still own. And that's the metal finishing side of the business, which we'll talk about later when it comes to ballistics. But I got into duck hunting as in college, really. But back then, Michigan, you had to be 14 to get your hunter safety certificate to hunt with a gun. And by that point, my dad had started the business that I now own, and the time for hunting during the week or even on weekends, just the time was spoken for. So I had that love for the outdoors that I never really was able to take advantage of until I was in college. And two of my buddies that became my roommates, my freshman year, we met in the dorm, they got me into duck and goose hunting. And then you have your own money working through college, and it just kind of started a whole addiction to spending a lot of paychecks doing the buying decoys and guns and clothes and shells, all that. So I hunted a lot through college, when I first got married, and then as soon as I had kids, that went down significantly. So fast forward 5 years, I have a little boy. I got a daughter who's a year and a half older than he is, but my son loves shooting BB guns and he's into it, right? So we end up going down to Arkansas on a snow goose hunt in the spring. And I told the guides, I said, hey, I'm bringing my little guy along. I hope it's no problem. They said, yeah, it shouldn't be a big deal. How old is he? I said, he's 5. And they said, ooh, man, I don't know if that's going to be for him. I said, just, you guys will see. You'll see. So I wanted to load up some ammunition for him that he could actually kill a bird with, with a 410 or with a 20 gauge. And I kind of failed the first year because, him being, 5 or 6 years old, maybe it was 6, the recoil of a 20 gauge, even what I downloaded, was still too much for him. But he did kill a goose that year. And, I loaded up my own ammunition for 12 gauge, because one of the things that I used to hate was crippling birds, where you'd hear pellets go into them. You'd see geese fly off with a dropped leg, or you'd lose a duck 400 yards away in the swamp. And it bothered me. And even the thought of ducks coming back to the blind still alive, I'd lose sleep over that. Like, it really, really genuinely disappointed me to know that your job is to have fun, enjoy the outdoors, harvest a bird, but just crippling was something I couldn't live with. And it was so different than what I remember my dad and his buddies doing up at the Todd farm in Michigan, when they would just stone cold kill geese. Like it couldn't be like polar opposites. So when I was loading my son's stuff up, I loaded mine, and everything on my end of the line, because I'm left-handed, I shoot the right end of the line, was getting wrecked. And I had all kinds of filler cards and fibers and all kinds of stuff that when you pull the trigger, the bird drops, but you've got all this stuff flying in the air, and the guides never see anything before like that. And they asked what that was all about. And I told them some stuff I loaded up by hand, and gave them a couple shells, and they saw they were loaded in clear hulls, had like pink wads. They're like, I want nothing to do with that. So the end of the third day, I gave them the rest of my ammunition. Fast forward a year, we go back, and these guys are dying for more of that stuff. They're like, did you bring any more of that that ammo with you this year? I said, yep, we got it. So that kind of started thinking like, these guys are professional field guides, and it's something that they don't see birds get killed like this. Like with the thousands of birds they harvest every year, they don't see birds get killed like this. So I just sold my anodizing business in Indiana, and my wife told me that I needed something to do after like a month of only working one job at my main business. So I started Boss and a couple phone calls, and I met Lee, and the rest is history, as they say.
What exactly were those loads that you were shooting on that first snow goose hunt?
Well, it was two different types of tungsten-based ammunition. One of them was a 13 density, and the other one was a 10 density that I was buying through the reloading supply places on the internet. And there's always guys that have hand loaded their stuff for eons, but that kind of got me thinking, maybe there's a market that, there was bismuth out there then. There were a couple of people making it, but it had been largely relegated to old guys with old guns. And I mean, I heard about bismuth back in the early 2000s when I was in college. And again, it was old guys, old guns. That's who shot bismuth. So you kind of just left it alone. And that's where meeting Lee, I told him I want to be like the Vice golf ball of the shotgun shell or the Dollar Shave Club, right? Where you got really good products that are delivered direct to the consumer. You don't have the middleman. And, it kind of triggered something in him that thought that maybe this was just different enough to make a go at it. And I wanted the best customer service, like the best. Almost to a fault. Like I say, we've got the best customer service. No one's perfect, but if you screw up, how you recover from the mistakes is really what separates the cream, how that rises to the top. So,
and what made you go to, you started out, and that I think Lee mentioned the first one that you guys came out with was that Shorty. It's a 2 3/4 5.
Oh, yeah.
Still popular.
Yeah.
But what made you choose that round specifically? That specific load as hey, this is the go-to. Like, this is the reason why we're doing this right here.
Well, I knew Lee and I were going to get along real well when he told me that he didn't shoot steel. And he shot one type of shot, and it was a tungsten number 7. And he said, well, if I take this project on, I at least have to know if the product works. So sense of my way, we'll take it to Saskatchewan. So I thought if I had to compete with a tungsten number 7, just density, and this is just math on paper, I needed to be 2 shot sizes smaller or larger, obviously with a lighter pellet. So I loaded up number 5s. And that kind of took it on all on its own. So you go from a guy that shot tungsten number 7s and me wanting to impress the guy that might be helping me launch this business. We started off with a number 5, and that's the way it kind of evolved. And we didn't do a 3-inch shell because, well, one, we couldn't get a loader that would load 3-inch at the time. It was all just on a small press doing short 2 3/4 inch shells. And 2, because the density, we were able to put a nominal 3-inch payload into a 2 3/4 inch shell. So the first season, 90% of our business was all 2 3/4 shells. So we knew we had something when we were able to convince a market of, not maybe the whole market, but our buyers, that were shooting 3 and 3.5 inch steel shells to start shooting these little short 2 3/4. So it kind of brought awareness to the brand where, hey, these guys are different, like in every way. Like they're telling us to shoot short shells, and it wasn't a gimmick. It was just physics, like density. You can put 1.25 ounces in, and for the last 3 generations or 3 decades at least, people are shooting 1.25 ounces of steel. So 1.25 ounces is the nominal payload, and we're putting that in a 2 3/4 inch shell. But we're discovering that we still have a lot of work to do, because our first year and a half, the word was out where shoot the 2 3/4 inch shell. But now, as we've got new people coming to the brand, that is like secondhand, like a guy buys our shells, they shoot them, they turn a guy onto it. That guy doesn't have the direct connection with us immediately. He's still buying the 3-inch shells, which is essentially a 3.5 inch payload. But again, I mean, it's the word's getting out, and the product's good, it works, and people are believing in it and continue to buy it. And we're doing our part, I think, to greatly reduce the amount of cripples that are being shot every year.
Absolutely. And Lee kind of touched on this where you guys, you kind of got this idea in your head that you were going to copper plate this bismuth. And he's like, Brandon just went in and started making this, and he was, kind of sharing that story. But from your perspective, like what made you look at that bismuth, the shot shell that you guys had, and then say, all right, we're about to make this thing better?
I'm never satisfied.
That's a good thing.
I mean Lee and I talk a lot about, we have discussions about all kinds of stuff on many different levels. And, one of the things when we first started working together, knowing that he was a big time photographer, he watched this Netflix movie called Kodachrome. And my grandpa used to shoot Kodachrome slides. He still is around, and he doesn't do film anymore or even digital. But I remember watching those slideshows and just the vibrant colors that Kodachrome film had. And I tried talking Lee into dusting off one of the old cameras and let's shoot some ads using old film, But anyway, in that movie, there's a line that kind of says, I'm paraphrasing, but no art that's worth anything was ever made out of happiness. And it's kind of a dark comment to say, but I kind of believe there's a lot of truth in it, that when things are going good, like there's not a whole heck of a lot to improve upon because your view to the world is everything's good. But I was in a particularly dark mood one day, and I had found out that there might be some upcoming competition with our product in response to the waves we made. And I kind of channeled Walt Disney, and his mantra was always to plus everything. What can we do to make what we've got even better, right? So he might have been one of few happy people that was able to improve on things, but he's probably in the vast minority. So I was walking by our plating department that we were doing a lot of copper work on, and I thought, what if putting a layer of copper on a bismuth pellet kind of had the effects of putting a layer of copper on lead? And I plated some shot, patterned it, and it patterned tighter. I'm like, this is weird. Let me do it again. So 5 patterns later, you're like, yeah, there's a trend here. So then we shot ballistic gel, and you're seeing way deeper penetration, especially at 40 yards. 30 yards, we were like 15% deeper than unplated. 40 yards, we were 40% deeper, and 50 yards, we were back to 15. So I thought, this can't be right. So then I loaded up a shell where I mixed the plated shot and the unplated shot. I put it on the bottom. I put it on the top. I mixed it all in. And every time we're seeing these consistent, deeper penetration in ballistics gel. And this was real gel, not the fake stuff that we shoot and take to trade shows that won't stink and melt. Like, this is the real gel. So that's when I called Lee back. I'm like, man, I think we got something, dude. So let's do it. So I contact the attorneys and had them do a background analysis and see if there was some kind of art that could be established for us putting a layer of copper on a bismuth pellet. And we did the filings and locked up the IP. And not that we're trying to freeze the market out. All that we want is, as a small business, we want our fair shot at trying to grow this thing organically and do things the right way in the name of conservation and build our own brand.
I think people who really aren't as familiar with bismuth, I think they've probably heard, and you kind of hear these rumors that bismuth is very brittle. It's much more brittle than steel, obviously, but even more so than lead.
Right.
But when you put that copper plating on it, it really kind of changes the dynamic of that shot.
It does. It does a good bit, but really what it does is it improves the penetration while still it helps minimize setback forces, and we can talk about that later on. But your pellets are going to deform going through a choke. They're going to deform when they're accelerated down the barrel. And there's things you can do when you construct the shell that minimize that, but anything you can do to improve it, right? So if you can have that pellet deform less running down the barrel, it's going to fly straighter. And if you can have it lower friction on the surface, it's going to penetrate deeper. It's going to slow down less going through tissue. But keeping that thin enough, that layer of copper thin enough, and still allowing that pellet to deform helps dump its energy, and that deformation process, which sometimes involves that pellet splitting in half after it goes through bone, is just going to increase the trauma, and that kills the cripple. So we get people that, again, like, we're dealing with 30 years, so that's at least 2 generations of people that have never been duck hunting or goose hunting with lead shot.
Yeah.
And if you talk to a guy, like I joke around and say, if a guy's got gray hair, he knows lead. But now what's happened, I got gray hair, and the only evidence of me seeing lead, in the field was my dad, right? So there's this lost period of time where we're bringing something out that has been around forever, but we've marketed it in such a way that it's available to anyone. It's not for old guys with old guns. So again, with that, with the deformation, the energy, all that dump, I mean, we're getting the penetration of lead with the copper plating, even though the pellet's a little lighter. So we've equaled it there, and we're increasing its effectiveness by still allowing that pellet to deform and create the wound channels. Like, we've got some guys up in the central part of Michigan that have their own hunting group, and they'll shoot anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 giant honkers a year. They will get some flight birds, but a lot of it is big local Michigan geese that they target.
Big resident birds, yeah.
The big boys, yep. So when we started off in 2018, we were giving them number 2s and 3 shot. Then they tried 3s, 4s, 5s, or 3-5 mix, and then they settled on number 4s. And what they noticed, again, like awesome field testing, shooting those 1,000, 12, 1,500 birds a year with all one shot, their crippling went down, their harvest numbers went up, and what they noticed was the blood trails that these geese would leave, when dogs brought them back, or the blood on their chest when they would have them, in the field, as well as when they were cleaning them. They're like, the wound channels in these things are like when we were shooting BB and number 2 steel, and that was with the number 4. So they switched in 19. They shot 4s. Last year, they made the decision to start shooting 20 gauges. So we had guys that in 2018 and prior, they were shooting BB, 2, and triple B steel 12 gauge 3.5s. Then they started shooting 2 3/4 4s. And now they've all switched to 20 and 28 gauges. And it's just had that much more of like an excitement and a thrill, less recoil, less noise, and it's different. So they're kind of the market's kind of taken this whole thing on its own by going from like 20 gauge is now kind of the new cool gun, and even further on down the line, 28, 16s, 410s. We're seeing it all. So the 12 gauge is still a solid seller for us, but a lot of guys are bringing out these old guns or purposely buying new sub-gauge guns just to shoot our stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've talked about that in length on this show with everyone from Phil Bergele, who's our shotgunning columnist, to
great dude. Phil's awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know he mentioned he was shooting some of your stuff this year, and he shoots those big Canadas as well. But really that transition to the 20 gauge within the waterfowling market, and I think everyone is in kind of in agreement that yeah, it's cool, and people are doing it because it's kind of trendy a little bit, but really it's the ammunition has caught up and is much more capable, and a lot of that is because of you guys and what you guys are doing, and other new technologies out there that have really changed the way that duck hunters are looking at the 20 gauge, and even like you said, this the 28. I mean, we're talking guys are going out with 28 gauges now to shoot geese, and but
yep.
As far as the one question I have for you, and that I get from other people too, when I'm kind of talking about Boss, or somebody's like, hey man, have you shot any of that new Boss? You guys always recommend shooting full chokes.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Can you just explain that to I understand it ballistically, but explain that to our audience where you're like, hey man, if you're going to shoot this, switch to a full choke.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a ballistic advantage, but also it might be selfish. I don't want to say selfish, but yeah, it's selfish. I mean, I hate seeing crippled birds, and a full choke is going to concentrate the energy in a smaller area. So you're going to have fewer flyers, and a lot of guys' proficiency isn't where it should be. And I want to hit on one thing. You said something about like how we're kind of changing, and everyone's kind of I'm not going to say that there probably is truth to that, but the biggest thing is part of the narrative that we like to promote is the bullet's not magic, right? The shot shell is not going to automatically increase your harvests. What it does is it shifts the odds back in the favor of the guy pulling the trigger. If you can't shoot, running boss is not going to make you a better shot. But if you couple like our love for conservation, my OCD and like almost neurotic attitude towards patterning and ballistics and all that, and it's going to get guys shooting paper, and they're going to start noticing, hey, point of impact, point of aim. I will say that I think we've gotten more people to shoot paper and pattern their shotgun since we started than probably anyone's done in the previous 10 years at a minimum. So we've got these guys that are actually taking their gun out. They're going shooting sporting clays. They're starting to get like geeky about pattern analysis and chokes and this and that. But there is truth in the fact that when you're shooting with a full choke, you are concentrating that shot column running downrange. And what it does is it slows down a little bit less slowly because bullets or the shot's moving in mass. And the outer edge of your pattern does not have the lethality that the center core does because those pellets are not traveling straight along the line of the barrel. They're flying off and veering off. So a lot of guys who are blowing feathers out of birds are catching them with a fringe of that pattern. And we like seeing guys either have clean kills or clean misses. And that's the name of the game. Like, you guys have spent a ton of time and resources tracking how many cripples are caused every year due to shots that either birds can't be retrieved with a dog or birds carry pellets later on and die. And we hate that number. It's gross. And as our brand grows, yeah, we're giving lethal ammunition, but it's also people buying in on the whole belief that, hey, I still have a lot of responsibility to bear in clean kills and clean misses. So in inside 30 yards, there's a lot of guys that say, I shoot all my ducks inside 30 over the decoys. Well, that's true to a point. People don't realize how quickly when a bird turns away after the first shot rings out, they can be 35, 40, 45, 50 yards by the time that third shot's pulled. So when a guy calls me and says, hey, what shot do I want to shoot? And I say, how far do you want to kill your birds? Well, 30 yards. I said, that's fine, but third shot, birds going out. Are you going to pull the trigger at 40? Are you going to be the guy that pulls the trigger at 50? And if you are, that's cool. We've got a product for that. If you can pull the shot off, we can sell you a product that will cleanly kill a bird at 45, 50 yards. So it's all about it's the whole bit. It's not just the ammunition. There's a lot of education that goes into it. And that's why partnering with DU is awesome, because you're helping us give a platform to send the message out and elevate everyone's game. Even if you don't shoot our shells and our brand's not for you, at least we can do our part to help spread the awareness that goes throughout the industry and everyone that goes out and hunts. Like, you got to take ethical shots, and there's things you can do to improve your success.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, getting people to put their shot on paper more routinely. I mean, working for Ducks Unlimited magazine and handling a digital editorial, I mean, it is amazing how much we actually talk about this. And then it's surprising and a little bit disheartening when even the guys that I duck hunt with regularly, I'm like, hey, man, how's that thing patterned? They're like, I don't know. Well, I never patterned it. It's like, man, like here, like the guys are like, I don't even know how to pattern. Like, man, I'll tell you what, Phil Bergeli's written about 25 columns on that thing. Right. I can get you that information pretty easily. And I think and I think Lee hit on it too when we originally had our conversation. That process from the patterning to finding the shell that is the most effective shell for you, and then making those decisions, making those ethical decisions to maybe not take that long shot. Like you said, clean kills, clean misses. It's definitely a mentality, and I'm sure that there are guys out there who none of this even pops into their head, and maybe those are the people who are not right for boss, or maybe there's people who maybe they are right for boss because maybe they need to kind of up their game a little bit as far as learning how this shot process works and mm-hmm. how to more effectively kill birds. But I mean, I think it's a great message that you guys are really getting out there, and it's awesome that you guys are doing it here with us with Ducks Unlimited. It totally makes sense.
No, it's there's and then there's always there's a lot being largely online based. There's always a lot of chatter that we build this following, and I mean it's growing year by year, and what people read and see is the honest truth. I mean, we really don't like manipulating our consumers, and I think it's been so refreshing that like guys they'll speak highly of our product and our brand and what we stand for, and we don't even need to get involved in those conversations because like what you read and what you hear and see, it's all honest. I mean, both good and bad, but we know that well over 90% of the people that try our product, we do repeat business with them, and that's the name of the game. And there's a lot that we have to worry about with the environment, with gun laws and everything else. And, we try to stay out of the retail market because the word is best served by serving the customers and growing it organically. So you don't have, a guy in a store who's responsible for 35 other non-toxic shells to represent the product. Because we are different. It's not just the shell. Anyone can make a shotgun shell, and they've been made for hundreds of years, but we just go about it a little bit differently. Yeah, it's better components, better ballistics. It works better, but the hunter still has to do their part.
What makes that Boss shot shell everything from any fillers to the wad, the cup, anything? What makes Boss stand out from that perspective?
Well, we've dumbed it down to a degree. Like I grew up loading trap loads that, I guess I didn't hit on that earlier, but I was introduced to a Mech 600 Junior. I think the one I've got was called a Mech Versa Mech. It was like, it's from the 60s or early 70s. And I would trying to get my dad into like taking me shooting and hunting. I thought, man, if I could demonstrate to him that I could build these shells, and I loved loading shells in the basement, like maybe he'll take me out hunting or pheasant hunting or this or that. And I got to go one time, and then about once or twice a year, he would take me to the shop here out behind the building and throw clay targets for me. And later on down the road, we ended up finding out that my dad, while doing everything he could run the business and raise the family, he was dealing with some health issues. He had multiple sclerosis that he had kept quiet for, let's see here, 20 years or 17 years. And it kind of came out where he couldn't hide it anymore. So he was dealing with some internal health issues that, that's a whole other issue. But anyway, I knew that if I used like really good components and built the shell like ammo manufacturers built lead Magnum loads back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, that we could have something really cool. So it started off with a lot of resources, reading books, recipes, trying this, trying that, meeting really smart people in the industry, ballisticians from gunpowder companies and industry people who made stuff, the wad manufacturers, all these companies. So we started just with like simple formulas. Let's dumb this down and build it like a heavy field load. And that's where it started. And then as we learned more organically, just a lot of trial and error and a lot of high level conversations with subject natures that we probably weren't comfortable with at first, but now we can speak at a high level about are like powder burn rates and the effect that chamber pressure has. And not only chamber pressure and how it relates to velocity, but area underneath the curve, the rise of how pressure peaks, what that does on a shot column, so on and so forth. So like there's two different ways, like I guess let me talk, now you're getting me going here, about the different ways to accelerate shot as it travels down the barrel, right? So let's say we want to move a car that's out of gas and we got to like jump start it, right? Or say it's no starter, dump the clutch, get the car going. You can either do that by pushing that car up to a certain speed, popping the clutch and letting it go, or you can rear end it with a semi truck, right? So the one's a lot more violent. Both are going to get that car moving down the road, but one of them is worse than others. And when we're dealing with soft shot, one of the things that we have to watch out for is the fashion in which that shot is accelerated down the barrel. So naturally, we want a slow burning powder to build a nice pressure over a longer period of time to gently move everything and get it going down the barrel, but yet still have complete ignition and combustion of the powder. So as you run slower powders, you have to have more of that to burn, which then becomes an issue for your primer to ignite. So it's a balancing act, right? And there's never, ever a free lunch. There's always compromises that are made. So the way we like to build our shells is we use the hottest primer we can get our hands on, which that was a new primer for us in 2020, which we're still using now in our 12 and 20 gauge. Lesser gauges doesn't make as much of a difference. So we want a good hot ignition source. We want to burn the slowest powder that we can that still burns cleanly, hits the pressures we want it to, and still will light reliably in cold weather. Because that's another thing that gets thrown out the window is cold weather performance. So when we're running larger powder charges of slower powder, you buy powder by the pound. And it all runs roughly the same cost. Some of the cheaper powders are a lot less expensive, but economics state that let's try to maximize profits by putting the least amount of powder in that'll still get us the desired end result. And the end result for ammunition is the velocity that it runs. So going back, we're putting more powder in, so it costs us more money, but what we're getting is better patterns. And this same thing is true of steel powders and everything else. The slower you can accelerate that shot charge going down the barrel, the better your patterns are going to be for, say, the same wad. Wad for wad, you're going to find that you can have better patterns with more gentle acceleration forces. So we're running maybe 15 to 25% more powder than some manufacturers are, because they want to put the lightest powder charge in that they can that gets the acceleration where it should be and still meets the SAMI spec for high-end pressure, so chamber pressure. So it's that balancing act. We're doing it functionally for the ballistics of the shell. Other people are doing it, and I may be speaking out of school, but in my experience, some of the other larger companies are trying to manage the bottom line, so they're running other powders that maybe aren't the best suited. But again, it's a compromise, and we don't compromise on certain things. I hope that doesn't come out wrong, because I'm not trying to start any issues. I'm just telling you why we feel what we do is a little bit different.
Yeah, no, and I don't think so. I think that's fine. And one thing that people have talked about, and this is kind of a mentality shift as well. And I kind of wanted to ask you about it because, 7-10 years ago, everyone was trying to get as fast a shell as they possibly can. And that's simple, physics, the energy downrange is high, it's math, it's on paper. But when people pick up a box of Boss and they look at it and it says, 1,300 feet per second, how do you guys, and how do you explain to people like, hey, this is why we chose, this velocity to fit this specific shell?
So high speed, speed kills, right? And with steel, there's companies that came out with really cool wads that can run a steel payload 1,700 feet per second downrange. But one of the things that people really don't, it's never been told to them except like in physics class in high school, but they were probably sleeping then. Like drag increases as the square of speed. So the faster you accelerate something, the faster something's moving, the drag increases exponentially. So it's not like I move it twice as fast, my drag is double. No, your drag is 4 times that much, right? So it's kind of it's a mind blower, and that's one of the issues with steel. Steel kills. It's killed for 30 years. Does it kill as good? We can have a debate on that, but I personally feel that denser materials kill better. So what happens with steel is, let's just take a steel 2, for example. The area of a steel 2, like the diameter of that pellet flying through the air, is a lot bigger, and it weighs about the same as our number 4. It's halfway between a number 3 and number 4. So just surface area alone, not moving both pellets at the same speed, this number 2 steel is going to slow down faster because it has a larger surface area, has more drag, right? So to overcome that, and where the industry's gone is, let's move steel faster. Well, the difference is, and I think Phil just wrote an article in one of your more recent DUs that came out, where he speaks to that point of like drag and everything else has an effect that downrange speed with these faster moving shotgun shells isn't all it's cracked up to be. I mean, I'm paraphrasing again, right? But so drag reduction is a huge thing. So that's where these guys that have gone, like with us, with our bismuth, and some of the other manufacturers using tungsten, super heavy tungsten. Yeah, it creates very little drag. So it flies through the air super straight, super fast, and it's super lethal. We feel there comes a point where you have to have a balance. Again, speaking compromises, right? Yeah, if everyone could afford a $6 or $8 shotgun shell, then everyone would be shooting that really tiny, heavy tungsten stuff. But having loaded tungsten myself and having hunted with it, there's not a shot that I've been able to pull off with one of those super heavy, super expensive shotgun shells that I haven't been able to do the same shot with our copper-plated Boss. Now, granted, I may be going up 2 pellets or maybe even 3 pellet sizes from a 9 to a 5, or like an 8 to a 5 or whatever, but you can still kill with it inside nominal distances, 50 and in, no problem. So, and again, for like 1/5 the cost, does it really justify spending 4, 5, 6 times the amount of money per squeeze? And we feel confident that like we kind of have that perfect balance of performance and value at a price point.
And I think one thing that people don't understand too, and this is something that I've learned over the years, patterning and getting to really know my shotgun and my shot a little better, is a lot of times that speed does not give you the patterns that you think. There's a lot of things going on, right, when that shot comes out the end of the barrel, right, and that speed is probably not the best for consistent patterning, I should say.
Well, yeah, and the reason why, I mean, from my perspective, having shot and designed and built our own loads, is there's, like we said earlier, there's a lot that goes on when you pull the trigger. So the primer is creating an explosion that's lighting the powder, and the powder is burning itself up so quickly that it's creating hot gases that are expanding, and that expansion of the gases is what's acting against that wad and shot cup that's moving everything down the barrel. So you've got pressure, right? And if everyone can like imagine like a nice little parabola, right, that you learn going back to math class in middle school and high school, the steeper that curve rises, that is how quickly that powder is being burnt, right? So you run, it's a compromise. So you want to be able to expand those gases and consume that powder fast enough that everything ignites, but not too quickly and not too slowly, because it's too slow, then you get really dirty burning. Your pressure level's not going to be safe in cold weather, because powders will burn slower in colder weather. It's a higher hurdle for those powders to jump over to consume themselves and burn up when they're cold. It's just less active. Speaking shot shells, that is. So in order to get velocity, you have to be able to build that pressure safely. And with bismuth shot, softer shot, or shot that is contained in a wad that's got a cushion section, that kind of acts as a shock absorber. But if you don't have a shock absorber built in, what happens is all that, it's like getting rear-ended by the semi-truck, right? Boom, everything goes forward, and you end up having pellets jumping out in front of your wad that are running down the barrel, not through the choke. And that's where you get flyers. So if you can gently hold that shot column in and treat it in such a way that you can still accelerate it without getting shot that wants to jump out in front, then you've got something there. And that's why you see some manufacturers use buffers, they'll use fillers, or there's other things that you can do. And if they're implemented in the right way, they do provide value. It just has to deliver the results. And again, sometimes the slower you move stuff, the tighter it patterns, regardless of what the material is. So it's all how you build that shell, design the load for the intended purpose.
Yeah, and throughout that whole process, as you're explaining, I think you painted a pretty good picture there of the exact process of when someone pulls the trigger. But then not only do you want that, basically a controlled explosion is exactly what you want. But then you want it to be consistently, that I think is probably one of the most difficult things is you want that to perform consistently. Over and over and over again. And that's probably where you guys really have put the time in.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like everything is compromised. Life is full of compromises, but once we select the formulation that works, taking all of the compromises, with powder selection, so on and so forth, once we develop a shell, we will not change that unless it's for the better. So that is like, I will not compromise on product quality. If there's value to the consumer, if it offers enhanced or improved performance, we're going to do it. We're never going to take a step back and deliver less, because the worst thing we could do is to sell a product that works and get a whole bunch of people buying it and then say, well, if we did this instead of that, we could save a penny and a half or 3 pennies a shell. And, it'll be fine because no one will care because we got this brand that everyone loves our stuff. No, that's not happening at Boss. Will not happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something that I know Lee spoke of, is, really being on, which is a little bit different, really being more loyal to the customer than what, consumers in general are probably accustomed to. And I think that's something that really stands out for you guys.
They're not used to that, I don't think. And I'm an extremely impatient, like OCD guy that I see something, I take care of it, I handle it. And when I order something, I want to have the consumer experience follow through with like how I envision business being done. Like we order a lot of materials in the metal finishing shop from an industrial supplier out of Chicago, McMaster Carr. They're nationwide, but ours out of Chicago. You can order what you want on the internet. It's going to be there tomorrow. You can call up customer service, super friendly. You have a problem with whatever you ordered, they warranty it. They are true people that honor their word, like love them. And that's what I wanted our customer service to be benchmarked against, was to deliver that, exceed expectations. And we noticed our first couple of years in business is Thursdays were the busiest days for us, because in my world, factory working, you get paid on Thursdays. So that was one of the first things people were buying our first 2 years was their shotgun shells. And it's not cheap. They're buying it cases at a time. So I'm taking, from what my estimates are, anywhere from a third or half of someone's paycheck for a week, and they're spending that with me. So I owe it to that guy to give them the best quality product and the best customer service that money can buy. And I'm not apologetic about it. I get in issue. I mean, sometimes it gets a little rough here at Boss when I feel there's things that need to be improved upon when it either comes to customer service or delivery or whatever. But it's because I've got the consumer's best interest at heart. I'm a consumer advocate, if there ever was such a thing, in a tiny little business like ours.
An impatient consumer advocate at that, right?
Yeah, big time. Big time.
That's awesome. Well, is there, before I get you out of here, is there one thing that you want, our audience to take away, the Ducks Unlimited audience? Is there one thing that you want those people to understand and know about Boss shot shells?
Oh man, I mean, we could go on for hours about this, right? But like I guess if there's two things that started it, it was It was my young kid. It was it was a high hurdle for a little guy to get into duck hunting and actually kill something, right? That and the ducks, man. I mean, that's what it's all about. We do not like cripples. We take crippling very, very, very seriously. And whatever we can do to drive that number down. Like I started looking like, okay, if Boss takes over this percentage of the industry, we know based on feedback from our customers that their cripples went from this to that, which I mean, it's a big number, like a lot of people have said that their cripples go down to almost zero, right? So we know the numbers you guys put together, how many millions of birds die due to crippling every single year. And we start extrapolating that into mating pairs and how much of the market we've got and how many birds we can send back to nest and reproduce every year. I think if that word continues to grow, and even if it's not with people buying from us, just being on this show and just having this conversation, if it helps one guy come to the brand or one guy who wants to still shoot steel, that's going to get him to go out and shoot some cardboard or paper, shoot some sporting clays, maybe get some different chokes, shoot different ammunition, then it's well worth it, right? Because this could be a generational thing that we're trying to get going, getting kids into the sport with lethal ammunition and trying to save these ducks from dying unnecessarily. That's it.
No, that's awesome. And, I think, you're talking, like you mentioned, like a generational deal, where you're talking about, getting more impactful ammunition for kids. I think that's a big deal. I've got 2 young daughters, and we're in the process. We're in that learning stage of getting, they're not shooting yet, but I know that once I get them, when they sit up to take a shot and they go through that process of, making a good shot, I want them to kill it, and that's a good point.
I can't tell you how many shotguns I went through from the time my kid was 5, even now, and he's a little guy, trying to get a gun that fit him. And, and what I tell parents now is I like to see little guys start off on a 28 gauge because a 410, the ballistics of a 410 are real finicky and they're not ideal. It's not easy for a kid to become confident with a 410. It's not. And that's where we go to 28 gauge. And I've got a duck property and anyone who hunts it's got to shoot 28 gauge or 410. We don't allow big bore stuff for different reasons. But if you get a 28 gauge with a youth stock, and even if it's too big for your kid, cut that stock down, take it to a gunsmith, get it to fit your child. And the recoil off of a 28 gauge is nothing compared to some of these other gauges. Even if it's a 410, fine. But if you really want to get your little guy going, I strongly suggest people look at that 28 gauge. The ballistics are near perfect. It's low recoil, relatively low noise, and it's a smooth shooting gun, regardless of the manufacturer. It's really something that I like to see little kids start off with that 28.
No, that's a good point. And I think, we've had discussions on this podcast about how even more hunters are going to that 28. And again, that's, definitely, a testament to better ammo over the years.
Yep. Just a quick story I got for you. So my little guy loves his 20 gauge, but out at our duck property, he's got to shoot 28. So one thing, shooting ducks or geese is one deal, but what we're doing now in the off season, just for good dog work, we go to local pheasant farm that we're members at, and we'll put up 12 to 15 pheasants a weekend for my dog. And my little guy, he's 10 now, he was struggling with beating me off the shot and being able to drop these birds. And I tell him, I said, Landon, you gotta be able to mount the gun, get up there and shoot. So he's struggling because that 20 gauge and his 28 that he hunts with in the field or duck and goose hunting, he can mount and still kill ducks. But walking through a field and being able to swing on a pheasant that flushes is a little trickier for him. So I've got an old single shot 410. And I said, I want you to shoot this gun. He said, I don't want to shoot it because it's an old hammer 410. I said, I'll give you $20 for every bird that you shoot with that thing. He says, okay, deal. He went out and shot his 3 birds with 3 shots to 410. So he wanted to do it again. And I said, well, I'll give you $20 until you miss, or $10 for every bird that you kill. He killed 5 of them yesterday. So, I mean, he's again, but by taking it from 20 gauge shooting 28, it's gun proficiency. The kid shoots a lot of clay targets. He shoots a lot of ducks. And now I've got him zoned in, killing crossers, right to left crossers. He's left-handed, and he's able to shoot right to left crossers at the 410 at 25 yards. Like that's good shooting on a pheasant or a chucker. So it's proficiency, and it's not there. You're never too young to start. Get a shotgun in the kid's hands, get him a 28 gauge for shooting ducks, and never look back.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good message for everybody to take right there. That's a cool story too. And luckily, it sounds like you're gonna, as well as Boss is going, you're probably not going to go broke handing out $20 bills, but it sounds like your son's going to try and do that for you. He's going to clean your wallet out for sure.
Yeah, and I don't mind paying it, even if it's $5 or whatever. I mean, I like rewarding the effort, and you got to want it, and he's got it. He's got it, and I love it, and it's infectious to see other kids. At first, everyone would always comment, "Man, your kid's so good in the field, this and that." When he's 5, 6, 7 years old, now he's 10. He's kind of blending into all these other, tween age kids, and but seeing these younger guys on social media posting their little guys hunting, killing ducks. We got a letter that a little guy wrote to us, handwritten letter, signed in cursive, right? Signed it Boss Man underneath his name, which I thought was awesome. Like, just seeing those little kids is just enough motivation to really make me feel like we're actually doing something cool, getting those little guys into it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Hey, Brandon, I appreciate you joining me today. Yep. Do you want to let everyone know where they can find Boss Shotshells? BossShotshells.com. And we've got phone number listed on the website. We got killer customer service. We're answering the phones usually from before 7 o'clock every morning until about 4 o'clock Eastern every afternoon. And again, it's we're kind of in weird times now, and we're still making shells, but we're hoping to switch over to turkey loads pretty soon. But as long as demand's up, we're going to keep doing our deal. So BossShotshells.com, and get a hold of us. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Brandon. Again, thanks for joining me today.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Hey, I'd like to thank my guest, Brandon Surecki, the founder of Boss Shotshells, for joining me today. I'd like to thank Clay Baird, our producer, for getting this show put together and sent out to you all. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining me on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.